I did want to mention something, it's kind of a recurring theme in my talks over the years, having to do with choosing repertoire. There are, of course, several criteria for choosing pieces in advance. Most of the programming I do is about a year before this, last winter, with some exceptions. And one of them is that we have one or two guest soloists who participate in a competition we hold in the fall, the Cooner Young Musicians Competition. And in mid-fall, I have a competition where young musicians 18 and under from all over the Bay Area audition for me for an opportunity to solo with the orchestra. And the orchestra's been doing this competition for well over 30 years. And it's gotten pretty well known for a variety of reasons. So the balance of the better is not the right word, but well-known teachers of young musicians throughout the Bay Area, including those at the Conservatory in San Francisco, because they have a very fine prep program of kids under 18, not kids, young musicians. So their competition's pretty fierce. And this year we had 16 young musicians audition, and I could have easily picked 4 or 5. It's kind of gratifying as a musician, an older musician and teacher, and a conductor, to have every year a plethora of really, really fine talent and excellent performances. So I chose 2, and on this concert we'll have one of them, Cheung. And then in the final concert of this year, the 5th concert, we'll have another, and the Sibelius Violin Concerto. So, but the balance of the repertoire I choose, as I mentioned, is the spring before. And there are actually 3 different bodies of people, so to speak, that I choose the repertoire for. And the first, of course, is you, our wonderful audience. Even if you don't like a piece, or the whole program, I hope that never happens, but if you don't like a piece that we perform, you can blame me. But I do choose repertoire, of course, based partly on the fact that you are here, you're a wonderful audience, and I hope that for at least a few hours you can come in out of the sun, wind, rain, or politics, or whatever's going on out there, and enjoy yourselves. And then I myself also pick literature that I like, repertoire, for a whole variety of reasons, some of it esoteric, some of it rare. I like to do pieces I've never conducted before or studied, and I don't mind doing Beethoven's 7th Symphony or 5th Symphony yet again, both of which I've conducted a number of times because they're great pieces. But that said, I try to kind of spread things out throughout the year and have unique programs that are kind of well balanced in the 5 concerts that we put on. And then, of course, there's the other group. And for me, this is really, pardon me for saying this to you, it's not meant as an insult, but this is an amateur orchestra, it's a volunteer orchestra. Some of our members do play professionally, but it's substantively amateurs. And really, the repertoire that I choose is to challenge and, if you will, educate and enliven the members of the orchestra and keep things kind of interesting for them. And so almost always we'll do 2 or 3 pieces that no one has played before. And sometimes we'll do pieces that no one's even heard of before. And I might be biased, but it seems to me that the balance of those pieces people enjoy working on, because one of the reasons why someone's in this orchestra is not just to play Beethoven over and over again, but to play different music and challenging music, and really, this is something, an instrument that many of our members have been, instruments that our members have been, some of them have been playing for 50, 60, 70 years, or less long. So I like to challenge them. On this program, speaking of which, we have 3 works that were actually composed in a fairly narrow window of less than 20 years in the early 20th century, between 1910 and 1927. And that's kind of unique, because typically when I choose programs, it's not the most important thing, of course, to do pieces from the 18th, 19th, 20th, or 17th or earlier centuries. Although orchestra music is substantively, if you will, a creature of pretty much 1600 on. And certainly the modern orchestra, the one with a full complement of woodwinds and brass and percussion, is really pretty much post-1850, 1860, for the most part. So balancing programs is kind of a unique thing. It's kind of fun to do. And no, I don't use a dartboard and close my eyes when I'm picking pieces. So back to this program. The earliest piece we have on the program from 1910 is by Claude Debussy, the superb French composer, and it's a very unique, interesting piece. I'll also talk about it briefly, as I mentioned, before each of the three pieces, but in some length now. It's a unique piece for two reasons. One is that although most musicologists don't like to stick in with the late 19th century art label of impressionist, nevertheless his music frequently has a kind of a wonderful kind of, not blurred so much as very fluid textures, where there's a lot of ebb and flow, like ships moving and like water moving. And in fact, one of his greatest orchestra pieces, La Mer, is the ocean or the sea. The piece that we're doing is unique in that it's a waltz, and waltzes, as you may know, are not exclusively the territory or the ownership of the Strauss family and other German composers of the late 19th and early 20th century, but yes. And the other aspect of this piece that I'll be talking about a little bit more detail and you'll be able to hear after intermission is the use of an instrument called the cimbalom, which is a traditionally Eastern European, substantively a Hungarian instrument used originally late 19th century. It was not invented, but in its modern iteration as a concert instrument, which we have over here. You really can't see it, it's just to the right on the first shelf of the tuba. It's a rectangular box, and it's pretty much, it's American and Eastern pre-1874 name in most languages is something along the lines of hammered dulcimer. It's an instrument that has horizontal strings, sets of strings, 3 to 4 octaves worth, in other words, about half what a piano has, 88 keys. And they're struck with either wooden or cloth-covered mallets. It's also used, very smaller versions, of course, are used in American folk music, substantively the Appalachian Mountains. A unique instrument, and as I said, Hungarian, so it's kind of curious that Debussy would latch onto this, and I think he used it, well, I know he used it substantively because it was such a unique sound, a fascinating sound. So the waltz, the name of it is, of course, the Ever Slow Waltz is pretty much an exact translation from the French, but really it's easier to understand it as a slow waltz. There was unique movements artistically and musically that were kind of passing through Europe, Western Europe especially, the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. And one of these that kind of hit France, and especially Paris, as a matter of fact, were very, very leisurely waltzes. And when you get to the place, and I'll probably repeat this later in my comments, when you hear this piece, it might put you into a state where you're kind of reminiscing about the past because it's so leisurely. It's kind of a cabaret, if you will, like piece. Really fascinating, as I said, use of cimbalom. Debussy first composed it for piano, solo piano, and like a number of his works, and other composers did, end of 19th, beginning of 20th century, he took his piano piece and orchestrated it, and that's the technical term when you take a piece that's either for a very small chamber group, or in this instance for solo piano, and create a orchestra version of it, an arrangement, if you will. So it's his own orchestration of it. Fascinating piece, really unique. The next piece, chronologically, from 1917 is the Zoltan Kodaly Janos suite, extracted from a larger work, a theatrical work, a fascinating work, where it's a little, I'll have to use the term, although this may not be appropriate, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Janos is a character who boasts, if you know Strauss's To Eulenspiegel's Merry Pranks, is something of a mythical-like character who boasted that at the end of the war between Europe, the balance of Europe, certainly England and France with Napoleon, Janos boasts that he defeated Napoleon almost single-handedly. So it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The important thing about the Kodaly, which will be the last piece on the program, is that Kodaly's music, the balance of it, is infused with either original folk-sounding, Hungarian, Eastern European sounding melodies, which he composed, or in fact he took traditional folk pieces that had been around, some probably for several hundred years, from throughout Eastern Europe, and set them for the orchestra as his kind of melodies of choice. It's not exactly plagiarizing, partly, of course, because there was no copywriting back then, but also because it was just if you will, a kind of a nationalist touch, not the negative use of nationalist, but a positive one, where you just take melodies or either original melodies that you create that are very much sounding like those of your particular ethnic group or area of ethnic groups. So it's a fascinating piece composed of multiple movements, and that piece will also feature the cimbalom as well, played by our stalwart Jay Stebley, who I'll introduce later. And then chronologically, the last piece that we perform, although first on the program, is the first concerto for violin of Sergei Prokofiev, the Russian composer, pretty much mid-20th century. This is from 1927. And it's very, very different, of course, from the Debussy, because that's a slow waltz and going to be done in waltz style. Very different from nationalistic music, although Prokofiev did, of course, include periodically traditional Russian folk songs in his music. This is an extant original work, and his first of two violin concertos. We performed several years ago with a very young violinist, Episcopal, who also performed the Brahms on our last concert. Before this, we performed the second violin concerto Prokofiev 2.5 years ago. A spectacular piece. This piece features, as I mentioned, one of our winners of the Kuhner Young Artist Competition, Cheung, a superb local violinist who, among other things, plays with a number of different groups, and most notably is concertmaster of the esteemed San Francisco Youth Orchestra, which is an incredible group. If you have not heard them, you should. They're all young musicians from throughout the Bay Area, and they play at the level of most professional groups throughout the world. So the Prokofiev is in a traditional format of 3 movements. However, there's something very unique about it. Prokofiev, like most great composers, was an experimenter, which means that he liked to try different things. And of course, he's going to use his own language. You'll recognize his melodic as well as harmonic composition, the chords that support the melody, in that it's a little bit thorny, as you would expect from a piece composed some 15 years after the Rite of Spring of Stravinsky, which is quite dissonant at times, at least for those people who like to listen to Beethoven and Brahms. One of the very distinctive things that's very unique that Prokofiev does is switch the tempo format of the traditional concerto, which pretty much since the High Baroque, or I should say the early classical period, in other words, very young Haydn, just before Mozart, is 3 movements: a fast movement, a slow movement, and then a quick movement again. All, of course, with the purpose of showing off, not showing off per se, but proving not only the technical but the musical abilities of the soloist. In this instance, Prokofiev switches things all around. He has one fast movement, and it's very fast, a scherzo, which is very, very quick piece in 3 that's sped up. And that's the middle movement. And the first movement is a moderato that's slightly elegiac and does get going a little bit faster, but that ends almost with an apotheosis moment, a place of calm. And the third movement has different tempi, but its base tempo is also moderate. A strange kind of, instead of fast, slow, fast, moderate, very fast, and moderate. And the third movement also uniquely is bookended, or I should say ends with an extended version of how the first movement ends. A very unique way of repeating an idea, and yet the movement comes very slowly, gradually, relaxes and relaxes to a moment of repose. And although the first especially, but even the third movement, this slowing down to this moment of repose, almost not quite a stasis moment, is very unique. As a teacher, I've found, especially the last few years, the way things are working in society, that a lot of my students, adults and young, are very easily agitated. And they, of course, being a human being, bring this to their lessons and when they play. And it's very much easier for them now than, say, 20 years ago to make errors because they're disrupted by what's going on. And I happen to like the word repose. Even though it's in the dictionary, it's a difficult word for us in a kind of a difficult time we're living in. So that's how this concerto ends. It's rather marvelous that way. So I hope you enjoy the program. We'll begin very shortly. Thank you.